Just be happy with who you are. Just be happy with who you are. Just be happy with who you are.
Welcome. We're doing Chapter 6, Personality Disorders. Now, as an example, Dave is known as a loner by his classmates. He seldom participates in social activities, and he only has a few friends, and he even avoids interacting with his resident roommates. Now, Dave's favorite thing to do is to watch TV, play video games. Now, he doesn't go out to movies, and he has very few hobbies that seem to give him joy. Even so, he does not appear lonely. His college major is in forestry management, and he often goes out on outings and requires long stays in provincial and national parks. His classmates would sit around together at campfire at night and socialize, and Dave would prefer to be by himself. Another example, Linda works in a small startup business specializing in technology development, and she describes by friends and family and coworkers as extremely compulsive. When she attends team meetings, Linda is demanding and insistent that things be done correctly in the manner by which they must be done. Now, her frustrations, she frustrates colleagues when she posts task lists for each project. Team members were expected to use red markers only and to check off each task posted on the bulletin board once the job was complete. Now, Linda became very upset when even the most trivial detail was not completed in accordance with her directions. Everything had to be done flawlessly. Now, we went from another example is Will went partying with friends in Toronto when he met a woman who offered him sex for money in a nearby hotel. Now, despite warnings from his friends to use a condom, he failed to do so. Throughout his life, Will has been known as a reckless or impulsive. He enjoys risky and dangerous activities such as racing his car against other willing drivers, discharging a gun that he owns into the night sky. Will becomes bored easily and needs constant excitement. His impulsivity, distractibility, and constant need for change makes it difficult for Will to hold down a job. Now, Dave, Linda, and Will's behavior, thoughts, and feelings typify how they generally respond to life situations. Now, these behavioral and mental characteristics makes each of the people in the examples unique, thus form the basis for their personalities. Now, in psychology, personality refers to a pattern of recognizable behaviors. Dave prefers spending time alone and avoids almost all social interactions. Linda is detail-oriented, a perfectionist and inflexible, and Will is, by contrast, impulsive, a thrill-seeker, and a risk-taker. So what makes anyone personality, more pathological? When can we enjoy time alone, or may like things to be orderly, or even desire the odd adrenaline rush? Basically, we need to pay attention to what makes behavior abnormal. Remember from Chapter 1. So what we're going to do is we're going to look at personality disorders in this chapter. The DSM-5 tends to see people with personality disorder as having traits either as egosyntonic, that is to say, as natural parts of their personality, or dystonic, behavior that is foreign or not part of their identities. Maladaptive or rigid behavior patterns or personality traits that are associated with stress, are personal distress, or impair the person's ability to function in a social or occupational roles are called personality disorders. People with personality disorders do generally recognize a need for change in themselves. Personality disorders may be organized into three clusters, and these clusters are as follows. There's a cluster A, people who are perceived as cold and eccentric. This cluster includes paranoid schizophrenia, and schizotypical personality disorders. Cluster B, people whose behavior is overly dramatic, emotional, or erratic. Now, this grouping consists of antisocial, borderline histrionic, and narcissistic personality disorders. And then cluster 3, people who often appear anxious or fearful. Now, this cluster includes avoidance, dependence, and obsessive compulsive personality disorder. And we're going to start with cluster A. Now, we're doing basically the descriptions of each, and as I've done in the past, we'll be doing 3 separate videos. So the personality disorder characterized, this is cluster A, by odd or eccentric behaviors. This includes people with paranoid personality disorder. They are unduly suspicious and mistrustful of others, to the point that their relationships suffer. But they do not hold more flagrant delusions typical of schizophrenia. So there's a distinction. Paranoid personality disorder is characterized by a belief that others are lying, cheating, exploiting, or trying to harm you in some manner. A perception of hidden or malicious meaning in benign comments being made toward them. Overthinking comments, analyzing, and always negative conclusions. An inability to work collaboratively with others. Emotional detachment, the inability to connect with others, emotionally numb, including hostility towards others and extreme jealousy in some cases. Now, it's important to remind ourselves that when we're talking about these sort of descriptors, that we may either ourselves or know others who show signs of these from time to time. That does not make the diagnostic criteria. We need to be much more fulfilling. You'll find those examples in your textbook. A person with paranoid personality disorder will seem cold and hostile. Remember that to them, they're only trying to protect themselves from what they perceive to be constant threats towards them. And that's an important recognition. People who experience these sorts of disorders aren't just doing them for fun. It's an altered state for them that interferes with their ability to be successful and not see things in the way that they do. It's normal to be reserved about displaying one's feelings, especially when one is among strangers. Sorry, I'm going to reword that because I think I didn't say it very clearly. It's normal to be reserved about displaying one's feelings, especially among strangers. But people with schizoid personality rarely express emotions and are distant and aloof. Yet the emotions of people with schizoid personalities are not as shallow or blunt as they are in people with schizophrenia. Now, the second cluster A type that we'll look at is schizoid personality disorder, which describes people as having little of any interest in social relationships. They show a restricted range of emotional expression and appear distant and aloof. Schizotypal personality appear odd and eccentric in their thoughts, mannerisms, and behaviors, but not to the degree as in schizophrenia. You could almost say this is a mild form of schizophrenia. Now, schizoid personality disorder is characterized by extreme introversion, withdrawn, not social, emotionally distant, even from very close family members. Also not interested in pursuing intimate relationships, their fixation on their own thoughts and feelings, emotional detachment, or emotional numbness. They prefer solitary activities, often include fantasy-type activities such as video games. Now, a third type of cluster A are the schizotypical personalities that appear odd and eccentric in their thoughts and mannerisms and behaviors, but not to the degree found in schizophrenia. Now, it's characterized by an indifference to and a withdrawal from others, ideas of reference. This is a form of delusional thinking where they will read personal meaning of other people's behavior or external events. These are not accurate and are independent of others. That is to say that it's just in their own experience that they see that about other people, where they read between the lines something that's there when it really isn't there. Now, also, this group incorporates what's known as magical or psychic thinking, the notion that they can influence the behavior and thoughts of others with their own thinking. Now, it's also characterized by odd, eccentric style of dressing. They're just generally eccentric. Now, that doesn't, if you're thinking about me, it doesn't fit entirely. I might like to wear shorts in the winter, but that's about it. Speech is often in metaphors, over-elaborate, and stereotypical, often revolving around specific topics, but beliefs that messages are hidden in public signs, radio, TV, and an advertisement. And it also has elements of suspicion or paranoid ideas. Inappropriate affect. This is basically an affect, or inappropriate affect, is that if something's really sad, you're at a funeral and you start laughing, that's inappropriate affect. The lack of close relationships except for the immediate family. So you're starting to get a feel in this that the erraticness and the disconnect that they have with other people. Now, next is cluster B, and personality disorders that are characterized by dramatic, emotional, or erratic behavior. Antisocial personality disorder describes people who are persistently engaged in behavior that violates social norms and the rights of others, and who tend to show no remorse for their misdeeds. Often characterized by actions most of us would find unacceptable. Stealing from friends and family, pathological lying, lying almost continuously, manipulating others with no concern for the victims and no feelings of remorse. The terms psychopath and sociopath were used to classify anti-personality disorder. Test terms include personality patterns that are characterized by superficial charm, deceitfulness, manipulativeness, irresponsibility, sensation-seeking, and the lack of empathy, anxiety, or remorse, combined with persistent violations of social norms. A social deviant and nomadic lifestyles, and very impulsive. Now, as far as criminality and antisocial behavior is concerned, not all criminals show signs of psychopathy or psychotherapy, and only a minority of people with psychopathic personality become criminals. Many psychopaths are law-abiding and quite successful in their chosen occupations, yet they possess a personality style characterized by callous disregard for interests and feelings of others. You might hear in the business world, it's not personal, it's just business. Well, not everybody is able to separate that so quickly and easily as someone who might have psychopathy, where that awareness isn't there. Psychological and biological factors associated with antisocial personality disorder and psychopathy include a lack of emotional responsiveness, the lack of anxiety when in stressful situations. The galvanic skin response is lower than most other people. They don't feel anxious and nervous in times when maybe most of us would. They have a good management of that, or the lack of emotional responsiveness. The craving for stimulation model, optimum level of arousal, they need higher than normal arousal to maintain optimum levels. Most of us need some degree of stress to optimize the arousal in order to attend to the task and complete it successfully. Somebody antisocial personality disorder need more than normal arousal just to get to the optimum level. And it's not always bad. Astronauts going into space in a rocket, thrill-seeking can be managed in these high-stress management situations. They don't get as anxious and nervous and fearful as we might under those same circumstances. 3, the lack of restraint on impulsivity. Lower levels of activity in the frontal lobe inhibits impulsive behavior. Number 4 on this characteristic is limbic abnormalities. Psychopaths are engaged in criminal activity, may have lower activity in the emotional processing areas of their brains. You'll find in Week 6, I've also posted a video of Dr. Dutton and his account of his research into psychopaths. You might find it interesting. Borderline personality disorder, this is another cluster B, is defined in terms of instability in self-image, relationships, and moods. So a lot of their interaction with other people is unpredictable and unstable in regards to who they see themselves being. People with borderline personality disorder tend to be uncertain about their values, goals, loyalties, career, choices of friends, and perhaps even sexual orientation. Now, people with borderline personality disorder often engage in impulsive acts that are frequently self-destructive. Some of the characterizations: difficult in controlling emotions or impulses, frequent dramatic changes in mood, opinions, and plans, a history of stormy relationships, often involving frequent and intense anger and possibly physical fights, fear of being alone, despite the tendency to push people away, and feeling of emptiness, very unstable in terms of relationships and moods, and etc. Now, a fourth group is that people with histrionic personality disorder, and they tend to be highly dramatic and emotional in their behavior and highlighted by excessive need to be the center of attention and receive reassurance, praise, and approval from others. Such persons often appear overly dramatic and emotional in their behavior. This is characterized by the tendency to be overly dramatic, seem to be acting almost. The term histrionic refers to a person who is theatrical in manner. Excessive sensitivity to approval of others, attention-grabbing, overly sexually provocative clothing and behavior. Attention-seeking is not always good attention. Bad attention is better than none. None needs to be at the center of attention. Excessive concern for physical appearance. False sense of intimacy with others, believes everyone loves them, and oftentimes people find them irritating. Constant, sudden emotional shifts. Very social and extroverted, but self-absorbed. Now, whereas people with narcissistic personality disorder have inflated, grandiose sense of themselves, and like those with the histrionic personalities, demand to be the center of attention. Now, this is characterized by an inflated sense of and a preoccupation with your own self-importance, achievements, and talents, constant attention-grabbing, and admiration-seeking behavior. Unlike histrionic personality disorders, a person with narcissistic personality disorder looks only for positive attention, excessive anger or shame in response to criticisms, manipulation of others to further their own desires, a belief that they are special or unique, and they're preoccupied with fantasies of power, brilliance, and recognition, often envious of others and believes others are envious of them. Now lastly, cluster 3, personality disorders characterized by anxious or fearful behavior. Avoidant personality disorder describes people who are so terrified of rejection and criticism that they are generally unwilling to enter relationships without usually strong reassurances of acceptance. It's characterized by hypersensitivity to criticism or rejection, self-imposed social isolation, extreme shyness in social situations, though strongly desiring close relationships, longing to be accepted but will do anything to avoid being criticized. Now, people with dependent personality disorder are overly dependent on others and have extreme difficulty acting independently or making even the smallest decision on their own. Now, it's characterized by, and it's very similar to avoidant personality disability or disorder, with the main difference being that there is a distinct dependence upon whom the person with the dependent personality disorder will attach. Excessive dependence on others, usually a specific person, and to meet your physical and emotional needs. Tolerance of poor, even abusive treatment in order to stay in relationships. Unwillingness to independently voice opinions and make decisions or initiate activities. Next, we'll look at people with obsessive compulsive personality disorder. Now, it's important to distinguish that this is not the same as obsessive compulsive disorder. This is personality disorder and have various traits such as orderliness, perfectionism, rigidity, and excessive attention to detail, but are without the true obsessions and compulsions associated with obsessive compulsive anxiety disorder. So with this one, the personality disorder of obsessive compulsive is characterized by excessive concern for order, rules, schedules, and lists. Perfectionism often so pronounced that that you can't complete tasks because the standards are so impossible to meet. An inability to throw out or even broken broken worthless objects that they keep everything. Inability to share responsibility with others. Inflexibility about ideas, beliefs, methods. This is the right way, period. Do it. Compulsive devotion to work at the expense of recreation and relationships. Financial stinginess. Discomfort with emotions and other aspects of close personal relationships, since they cannot be controlled or structured. So some problems that might occur with the classification of personality disorders, because there's a lot of similarities and yet there are differences. And there's various controversies and problems attend the classification of personality disorders, including the lack of demonstrated reliability and validity. And that's always important with any research-based or categorizing where decisions are being made. It has to be reliable and it has to be valid. Remember when looking at research and looking at the weigh scales, that's from chapter 1. Too much overlap among the categories, and you maybe noticed that yourself in the descriptions. That sounds a lot like the previous one. Difficulty in distinguishing between variations in normal behavior and abnormal behavior, and the underlying sexist bias in certain categories and confusion of labels with explanations. To address the problems of overlap of diagnosis, the DSM-5 proposed a research model for personality disorder diagnosis and conceptualization. This model emphasizes functional impairments in the personality, in a person's personality, and traits with underlying pathology. 6 personality disorders are derived from the model and include antisocial, avoidant, borderline, narcissistic, obsessive compulsive, and schizotypal personality disorder, and that was from 2013. And that was when the DSM-5 was introduced. Since the model includes both traits and disorders, it would allow the clinician to take into account the antisocial traits of a person without diagnosing APD. All right, well, thanks everybody. This is the first of 3. This is looking at the description, and we'll move into doing theoretical perspectives in the second and treatment in the third. Thank you, everybody. See you in the next video.